Hello, Maddie here, and Merry Christmas. This Christmas season, you're probably only getting one Christmas video. I'm sorry. If you read the description on my last video, life just kind of got crazy there for a little bit, but it's calmed down now as we go into actually Christmas Day, which is very exciting and wonderful. I did this a year ago, 2 years ago. I honestly don't remember, but I've done a previous video of me just reading Christmas stories. So we're going to read you a couple of more Christmas stories from the Christmas in My Heart book series. There's multiple volumes and they're just, each individual book is a collection of short Christmas stories. So I'm going to be reading a couple of them to you today. They're both about perspective. And I feel like maybe that's what a lot of Christmas stories are about, that it's easy to get caught up in the hustle and bustle, and it's easy to kind of forget that it's more than just presents, but it's about time with family. It's about the real things that matter in life. And it's about kind of recentering and regrounding when all of the world, commercialism, capitalism, all of it has told us that that's not it. It is all about the presents and it's about the money that you spend. It's the places that you go. Those are all it all needs to be measurable to determine whether it's, an actual Merry Christmas or not. So these stories are to help put that into perspective for you. I do not own physical copies, but we have a bunch of them on our family Nook account. So I am going to be reading them off of it's a tablet, but it's my Nook. So the first one is My Christmas Miracle by Taylor Caldwell. And all of the Christmas in My Heart stories, they all have little prefaces. So I will also be reading that. It's very short. So famous and renowned is Taylor Caldwell to us today that it is difficult for us to conceptualize her as a wan, depressed, and frightened young mother, alone, nearly destitute, jobless, and having to face the bleakest Christmas of her life. She had almost lost faith in God himself. And then, for many of us, one Christmas stands out from all the others. The one when the meaning of the day shone clearest. Although I did not guess it, my own truest Christmas began on a rainy spring day in the bleakest year of my life. Recently divorced, I was in my 20s, had no job, and was on my way downtown to go the rounds of the employment offices. I had no umbrella, for my old one had fallen apart, and I could not afford another one. I sat down in the streetcar, and there, against the seat, was a beautiful silk umbrella with a silver handle inlaid with gold and flecks of bright enamel. I had never seen anything so lovely. I examined the handle and saw a name engraved among the golden scrolls. The usual procedure would have been to turn in the umbrella to the conductor, but on impulse, I decided to take it with me and find the owner myself. I got off the streetcar in a downpour and thankfully opened the umbrella to protect myself. Then I searched a telephone book for the name on the umbrella and found it. I called and a lady answered. Yes, she said in surprise, that was her umbrella, which her parents, now dead, had given her for a birthday present. But, she added, it had been stolen from her locker at school. She was a teacher. More than a year before. She was so excited that I forgot I was looking for a job and went directly to her small house. She took the umbrella and her eyes filled with tears. The teacher wanted to give me a reward, but, though $20 was all I had in the world, her happiness at retrieving this special possession was such that to have accepted money would have spoiled something. We talked for a while, and I must have given her my address. I don't remember. The next 6 months were wretched. I was able to obtain only temporary employment here and there for a small salary, though this was what they now call the roaring 20s. But I put aside 25 or 50 cents when I could afford it for my little girl's Christmas presents. It took me 6 months to save $8. My last job ended the day before Christmas. My $30 rent was soon due, and I had $15 to my name, which Peggy and I would need for food. She was home from her convent boarding school and was excitedly looking forward to her gifts the next day, which I had already purchased. I had bought her a small tree, and we were going to decorate it that night. The stormy air was full of the sound of Christmas merriment as I walked from the streetcar to my small apartment. Bells rang and children shouted in the bitter dusk of the night, and windows were lighted and everyone was running and laughing, but there would be no Christmas for me. I knew. No gifts, no remembrance whatsoever. As I struggled through the snowdrifts, I just about reached the lowest point in my life. Unless a miracle happened, I would be homeless in January, foodless, jobless. I had prayed steadily for weeks, and there had been no answer but this coldness and darkness, this harsh air, this abandonment. God and men had completely forgotten me. I felt old as death and as lonely. What was to become of us? I looked in my mailbox. There were only bills in it, a sheaf of them, and 2 white envelopes, which I was sure contained more bills. I went up 3 dusty flights of stairs, and I cried, shivering in my thin coat. But I made myself smile so I could greet my little daughter with a pretense of happiness. She opened the door for me and threw herself in my arms, screaming joyously and demanding that we decorate the tree immediately. Peggy was not yet 6 years old and had been alone all day while I worked. She had set our kitchen table for our evening meal proudly and put pans out and the 3 cans of food which would be our dinner. For some reason, when I looked at those pans and cans, I felt brokenhearted. We would have only hamburgers for our Christmas dinner tomorrow and gelatin. I stood in the cold little kitchen and misery overwhelmed me. For the first time in my life, I doubted the existence of God and his mercy, and the coldness in my heart was colder than ice. The doorbell rang and Peggy ran fleetly to answer it, calling that it must be Santa Claus. Then I heard a man talking heartily to her and went to the door. He was a delivery man, and his arms were full of big parcels, and he was laughing at my child's frenzied joy and her dancing. "This is a mistake," I said, but he read the name on the parcels, and they were for me. When he had gone, I could only stare at the boxes. Peggy and I sat on the floor and opened them. A huge doll, 3 times the size of the one I had bought for her. Gloves, candy, a beautiful leather purse. Incredible. I looked for the name of the sender. It was the teacher. The address simply California, where she had moved. Our dinner that night was the most delicious I had ever eaten. I could only pray in myself, "Thank you, Father." I forgot I had no money for the rent and only $15 in my purse and no job. My child and I ate and laughed together in happiness. Then we decorated the little tree and marveled at it. I put Peggy to bed and set up her gifts around the tree, and a sweet peace flooded me like a benediction. I had some hope again. I could even examine the sheaf of bills without cringing. Then I opened the 2 white envelopes. One contained a check for $30 from a company I had worked for briefly in the summer. It was, said a note, my Christmas bonus. My rent. The other envelope was an offer of a permanent position with the government to begin 2 days after Christmas. I sat with the letter in my hand and the check on the table before me, and I think that was the most joyful moment of my life to that time. The church bells began to ring. I hurriedly looked at my child, who was sleeping blissfully, and ran down to the street. Everywhere people were walking to church to celebrate the birth of the Savior. People smiled at me, and I smiled back. The storm had stopped. The sky was pure and glittering with stars. "The Lord is born," sang the bells of the crystal night and the laughing darkness. Someone began to sing, "Come all ye faithful." I joined in and sang with strangers all about me. I am not alone at all, I thought. I was never alone at all. And that, of course, is the message of Christmas. We are never alone. Not when the night is darkest, the wind coldest, the world seemingly most indifferent, for this is still the time God chooses. I picked this story because it's very simple and basic, but I feel like it's a very good indicator just kind of how much our world has changed and how easy it is to get caught up in these things, because this story takes place 100 years ago in the 1920s. We are now in the 2020s, and her rent was $30. Like, I can't even imagine that. And she had, $15 to her name, and she felt so hopeless. But because of one small act months previous, and that wasn't even all of it, that was just part of it. And then there was the Christmas bonus portion, which I know a lot of jobs, you don't get a Christmas bonus unless you were actively working at that company at that time. So for it to be a temporary position from the summer, to have given her that, that's incredible. And then to also receive the permanent position on top of that, to have all these things fall into place at once, to lift her spirits. And I know for a lot of people, that's exactly what they would need for this Christmas, to have some hope. I know there are a lot of people that will want and need these things and will not get them. And I feel like this is a reminder that, like she says at the very end, that we're not alone. We were never alone, and we will never be alone. So I hope if you are struggling at all, or know anyone that's struggling, that if you are able to help, that you will help. And if you're struggling, that you will know that you're not alone. Next is one of the shortest Christmas stories I've ever read, but it's just like, it's really cute and it's really sweet. And it's basically my hope for all of our heart for this Christmas season. So I hope you will enjoy it along with me. Trouble at the Inn by Dina Donahue. This is the preface. What could be new about a local nativity play? Children in bathrobes and sheets flubbing their lines. Not always. Sometimes this very spontaneity results in the sudden need to wipe something out of one's eyes. Stories cannot be judged by length alone, but even though the story is extremely short, so many wrote in begging that we include it, that we had little choice but to add it to this collection. For years now, whenever Christmas pageants were talked about in a certain little town in the Midwest, someone is sure to mention the name of Wallace Perling. Wally's performance in one annual production of the Nativity play has slipped into the realm of legend, but the old-timers who were in the audience that night never tire of recalling exactly what happened. Wally was 9 that year and in the 2nd grade, though he should have been in the 4th. Most people in town knew he had difficulty in keeping up. He was big and clumsy, slow in movement and mind. Still, Wally was well liked by the other children in his class, all of whom were smaller than he, though the boys had trouble hiding their irritation when the uncoordinated Wally would ask to play ball with them. Most often, they'd find a way to keep him off the field, but Wally would hang around anyway, not sulking, just hoping. He was always a helpful boy, a willing and smiling one, and the natural protector, paradoxically, of the underdog. Sometimes, if the older boys chased the younger ones away, it would always be Wally who'd say, "Can't they stay? They're no bother." Wally fancied the idea of being a shepherd with a flute in the Christmas pageant that year, but the play's director, Miss Lombard, assigned him to a more important role. After all, she reasoned, the innkeeper did not have too many lines, and Wally's size would make his refusal of lodging to Joseph more forceful. And so it happened that the usual large partisan audience gathered for the town's Yuletide extravaganza of the crooks and crotchets, of beards, crowns, halos, and a whole stage full of squeaky voices. No one on stage or off was more caught up in the magic of the night than Wallace Purling. They said later he stood in the wings and watched the performance with such fascination that from time to time Miss Lombard had to make sure he didn't wander on stage before his cue. Then the time came when Joseph appeared, slowly, tenderly, guiding Mary to the door of the inn. Joseph knocked hard on the wooden door set into the painted backdrop. Wally, the innkeeper, was there, waiting. "What do you want?" Wally said, swinging the door open with a brusque gesture. "We seek lodging." "Seek it elsewhere." Wally looked straight ahead, but spoke vigorously. "The inn is filled." "Sir, we have already asked everywhere in vain. We have traveled far and are very weary." "There is no room in this inn for you." Wally looked properly stern. "Please, good innkeeper, this is my wife Mary. She is heavy with child and needs a place to rest. Surely you must have some small corner for her. She is so tired." For the first time, the innkeeper relaxed his stiff stance and looked down at Mary. With that, there was a long pause. Long enough to make the audience a bit tense with embarrassment. "No, be gone," the prompter whispered from the wings. "No," Wally repeated automatically, "be gone." Joseph sadly placed his arm around Mary, and Mary laid her head upon her husband's shoulder, and the two of them started to move away. The innkeeper did not return inside his inn, however. Wally stood there in the doorway, watching the forlorn couple. His mouth was open, his brow creased with concern, his eyes filled unmistakably with tears. And suddenly, this Christmas pageant became different from all others. "Don't go, Joseph," Wally cried out. "Bring Mary back." And Wallace Purling's face grew into a bright smile. "You can have my room." Some people in town thought that the pageant had been ruined, yet there were others, many, many others, who considered it the most Christmas of all Christmas pageants they had ever seen. I don't know. I just really like that. The idea of him being like, "Oh, I can't be me." Like, "No, you can have my room." And I hope that we can kind of all keep that wonderment and like openness, because this is a season where it's so contrasted between like selfishness and like, well, what are you getting me, or what am I receiving for Christmas, versus like, oh, I need to make sure I get everybody perfect gifts. It's like this weird, I don't know. It's just so awkward and uncomfortable and stressful, constantly weighing what you're getting versus what you're giving and everything in between. And instead just to kind of push that all aside and just be open-hearted to what you're giving and how you're treating people this season, because you never know what they're going through or what they're experiencing. So saying, "No, you can have my room," when my lines have said that I just turn you away and close the door, but I'm going to go against the grain and I'm going to say, "No, you can have my room." I think that's really good. And finally, my last story is thinking about, I know I get so stressed out about making sure I get everybody the right thing. And I've obviously still get people gifts, but I've been trying to work harder at being not worrying so much about exactly spending the exact same amount of money on the same people and, in whatever grouping, but being more thoughtful in what I give, even if it's not necessarily expensive, or if something is more expensive, it doesn't matter. It's more about where it's coming from and the hope that it be something they genuinely enjoy and appreciate. And just know, I want the gifts more to be about them feeling just like really loved, and not just being an obligation, but being like, I see you and I know you and I love you and I want you to feel that love whenever you see this thing or whatever. So my final story is A Gift from the Heart by Norman Vincent Peale. And the preface reads, "What do you give to someone who already has everything money can buy? In our affluent society, this is anything but an uncommon question." Norman Vincent Peale, so recently laid to rest, was for most of this past century one of the most beloved, and certainly most read, preachers in America. As pastor of New York's prestigious Marble Collegiate Church, he gained a national following. Later, he became the guiding spirit in one of the most cherished inspirational magazines we have, Guideposts. But out of all his vast output, nothing is reread with more frequency or tears than this brief true story. New York City, where I live, is impressive at any time, but as Christmas approaches, it's overwhelming. Store windows blaze with light and color, furs and jewels. Golden angels, 40 feet tall, hover over Fifth Avenue. Wealth, power, opulence. Nothing in the world can match this fabulous display. Through the gleaming canyons, people hurry to find last-minute gifts. Money seems to be no problem. If there's a problem, it's that the recipients so often have everything they need or want that it's hard to find anything suitable, anything that will really say, I love you. Last December, as Christ's birthday drew near, a stranger was faced with just that problem. She had come from Switzerland to live in an American home to perfect her English. In return, she was willing to act as secretary, mind the grandchildren, do anything she was asked. She was just a girl in her late teens. Her name was Ursula. One of the tasks her employers gave Ursula was keeping track of Christmas presents as they arrived. There were many, and all would require acknowledgement. Ursula kept a faithful record, but with a growing sense of concern, she was grateful to her American friends. She wanted to show her gratitude by giving them a Christmas present, but nothing she could buy with her small allowance could compare with the gifts she was recording daily. Besides, even without these gifts, it seemed to her that her employers already had everything. At night from her window, Ursula could see the snowy expanse of Central Park, and beyond it, the jagged skyline of the city. Far below, in the restless streets, taxis hooted and traffic lights winked red and green. It was so different from the silent majesty of the Alps that at times she had to blink back tears of the homesickness she was careful never to show. It was in the solitude of her little room, a few days before Christmas, that her secret idea came to Ursula. It was almost as if a voice spoke clearly inside her head. It's true, said the voice, that many people in this city have much more than you do, but surely there are many who have far less. If you will think about this, you may find a solution to what's troubling you. Ursula thought long and hard. Finally, on her day off, which was Christmas Eve, she went to a great department store. She moved slowly along the crowded aisles, selecting and rejecting things in her mind. At last she bought something and had it wrapped in gaily colored paper. She went out into the gray twilight and looked helplessly around. Finally, she went up to a doorman, resplendent in blue and gold. "Excuse, please," she said in her hesitant English. "Can you tell me where to find a poor street?" "A poor street, miss?" said the puzzled man. "Yes, a very poor street, the poorest in the city." The doorman looked doubtful. "Well, you might try Harlem, or down in the Village, or the Lower East Side, maybe." But these names meant nothing to Ursula. She thanked the doorman and walked along, threading her way through the stream of shoppers until she came to a tall policeman. "Please," she said, "can you direct me to a very poor street in Harlem?" The policeman looked at her sharply and shook his head. "Harlem's no place for you, miss," and he blew his whistle and sent the traffic swirling past. Holding her package carefully, Ursula went on, head bowed against the sharp wind. If a street looked poorer than the one she was on, she took it. But none seemed like the slums she had heard about. Once she stopped a woman. "Please, where do the very poor people live?" But the woman gave her a stare and hurried on. Darkness came sifting from the sky. Ursula was cold and discouraged and afraid of becoming lost. She came to an intersection and stood forlornly on the corner. What she was trying to do suddenly seemed foolish, impulsive, absurd. Then, through the traffic's roar, she heard the cheerful tinkle of a bell. On the corner opposite, a Salvation Army man was making his traditional Christmas appeal. At once, Ursula felt better. The Salvation Army was a part of life in Switzerland, too. Surely this man could tell her what she wanted to know. She waited for the light, then crossed over to him. "Can you help me? I'm looking for a baby. I have here a little present for the poorest baby I can find." And she held up the package with the green ribbon and the gaily colored paper. Dressed in gloves and overcoat a size too big for him, he seemed a very ordinary man. But behind his steel-rimmed glasses, his eyes were kind. He looked at Ursula and stopped ringing his bell. "What kind of present?" he asked. "A little dress. For a small, poor baby. Do you know of one?" "Oh, yes," he said. "Of more than one, I'm afraid." "Is it far away? I could take a taxi, maybe." The Salvation Army man wrinkled his forehead, finally said, "It's almost 6 o'clock. My relief will show up then. If you want to wait, and if you can afford a $1 taxi ride, I'll take you to a family in my own neighborhood who needs just about everything. And they have a small baby?" "A very small baby." "Then," said Ursula joyfully, "I wait." The substitute bell ringer came. A cruising taxi slowed. In its welcome warmth, she told her new friend about herself, how she came to be in New York, what she was trying to do. He listened in silence, and the taxi driver listened too. When they reached their destination, the driver said, "Take your time, miss. I'll wait for you." On the sidewalk, Ursula stared up at the forbidding tenement. Dark, decaying, saturated with hopelessness. A gust of wind, iron cold, stirred the refuse in the street and rattled the reeling ash cans. "They live on the third floor," the Salvation Army man said. "Shall we go up?" But Ursula shook her head. "They would try to thank me, and this is not from me." She pressed the package into his hand. "Take it up for me, please. Say it's from someone who has everything." The taxi bore her swiftly from dark streets to lighted ones, from misery to abundance. She tried to visualize the Salvation Army man climbing the stairs, the knock, the explanation, the package being opened, the dress on the baby. It was hard to do. Arriving at the apartment house on Fifth Avenue, where she lived, she fumbled in her purse, but the driver flicked the flag up. "No charge, miss." "No charge?" echoed Ursula, bewildered. "Don't worry," the driver said. "I've been paid." He smiled at her and drove away. Ursula was up early the next day. She sat at the table with special care. By the time she was finished, the family was awake, and there was all the excitement and laughter of Christmas morning. Soon the living room was a sea of discarded wrappings. Ursula thanked everyone for the presents she received. Finally, when there was a lull, she began to explain hesitantly why there seemed to be none from her. She told about going to the department store. She told about the Salvation Army man. She told about the taxi driver. When she finished, there was a long silence. No one seemed to trust himself to speak. "So you see," said Ursula, "I tried to do a kindness in your name, and this is my Christmas present to you. How do I happen to know all this? I know it because ours was the home where Ursula lived. Ours was the Christmas she shared. We were like many Americans, so richly blessed that to this child from across the sea there seemed to be nothing she could add to the material things we already had. And so she offered something of far greater value, a gift from the heart, an act of kindness carried out in our name. Strange, isn't it? A shy Swiss girl alone in a great impersonal city. You would think that nothing she could do would affect anyone, and yet, by trying to give away love, she brought the true spirit of Christmas into our lives, the spirit of selfless giving. That was Ursula's secret, and she shared it with us all. So, I want to just say a very, very Merry Christmas to everybody. And I hope that this season, with its ups and its downs, its highs and its lows, its good and its bad, I hope that you have a very Merry Christmas. I hope that you are surrounded by love and light, and that whether you have all the material things in the world and want for nothing, or if you want for everything because you're not sure how you're going to pay your rent come January, I hope you know that you are loved, you are not alone, that we'll get through this all together. So, with all of that, I hope you have a great rest of your day. I hope you have a great night. Hope you have a great week, great weekend, great month, great rest of year 2024. I hope you have all the greats because you're truly worthy and deserving of them. So until next time, 再见. Merry Christmas.